In the desolate cliffs of Cornwall, 1897, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson seek respite, only to stumble into a chilling mystery. A family struck down by madness and death, their faces frozen in terror, all linked to a sinister plant, the devils, foot whose fumes poison the mind. As Holmes unravels a web of greed, love, and vengeance, a second murder deepens the enigma. With a killer wielding an invisible weapon, can Holmes solve the case before more lives are lost? Step into a tale of dark secrets and moral dilemmas in the adventure of the Devil's Foot. Chapter 1. The Cornish Retreating, the spring of 1897. The relentless demands of Sherlock Holmes's profession had begun to tell upon his formidable constitution. His gaunt frame, always lean, had grown almost spectral, and the intensity of his grey eyes, though undimmed, was now shadowed by a weariness that alarmed me. The ceaseless parade of clients, the late nights spent in chemical analysis or poring over cryptic ciphers, and the frequent forays into London's underbelly had left their mark. Dr. Moore Agar, a Harley Street specialist whose reputation for discretion matched his skill, was consulted at my insistence. His verdict was unequivocal. Holmes required complete rest, far from the fog-choked streets and incessant clamour of the metropolis. Take him to the edge of the world, Dr. Watson, Agar had said, where the air is clean and the mind untroubled. Thus it was that we found ourselves bound for the wild, windswept coast of Cornwall, to a modest cottage perched on the cliffs above Poldhu Bay, where the Atlantic's roar was a constant companion and the horizon stretched unbroken to the Americas. Holmes, ever resistant to idleness, had met the prospect of a retreat with thinly veiled disdain. "A holiday, Watson," he had remarked, his voice edged with irony as we sat in our Baker Street rooms. "Do you propose I trade the pursuit of crime for the contemplation of seagulls?" Yet even he could not deny the tremor in his hands, the occasional lapse in concentration that betrayed a mind pushed to its limits. I pressed my case with the authority of both friend and physician, citing the risks of nervous collapse, and at length he relented. "Very well," he said, with a flicker of amusement. "Let us seek this pastoral purgatory. But, I warn you, trouble has a way of sniffing us out, even in the wilds." His words, lightly spoken, would prove prophetic. The journey to Cornwall was a study in contrasts. London's bustle gave way to the rolling fields of the West Country, where hedgerows bloomed with primrose and the air grew sharp with the promise of the sea. At Penzance, we changed to a local train, a rattling contraption that wound through narrow valleys and past ancient stone walls, until we reached the tiny station at Tredannick Wallers. From there, a cart driven by a taciturn farmer carried us along a rutted track to our destination. The cottage, leased through a London acquaintance, belonged to Mr. Mortimer Tregennis, a local gentleman of modest means but considerable knowledge of the region. It stood alone on a grassy knoll, its whitewashed walls weathered by salt and storm, its slate roof gleaming dully under the fitful spring sun. To the west, the cliffs dropped sheer to the churning sea, while to the east, the land sloped gently toward the village 2 miles distant, its church spire a faint needle against the sky. The cottage itself was a study in simplicity, its low ceilings and flagstone floors exuding a quiet charm. The sitting room, warmed by a stone hearth, was sparsely furnished. A deal table, a pair of worn armchairs, and shelves bearing faded nautical charts and a few dog-eared volumes on Cornish history. The windows, small and deep-set, rattled in the ceaseless wind, offering glimpses of the restless sea. Our bedrooms were equally unadorned, with iron bedsteads and patchwork quilts. But from mine, I could hear the waves crashing against the rocks below, a sound both soothing and relentless. The isolation was profound. Save for the gulls and the distant bark of a fox, we were alone with the elements. Mr. Tregennis called upon us the morning after our arrival, bringing a basket of provisions, fresh mackerel, a loaf of crusty bread, and a wedge of sharp Cornish cheese. He was a lean man, perhaps 40, with a face etched by sun and wind, and eyes that held a curious intensity, as if perpetually weighing the world. His manner was courteous but reserved, his conversation confined to practicalities, the state of the cottage, the nearest market, the likelihood of spring storms. Yet there was a depth to him, a hint of secrets held close, that did not escape Holmes's notice. "You have lived here long, Mr. Tregennis?" Holmes inquired, his tone casual but his gaze sharp. Tregennis nodded, mentioning a family rooted in Cornwall for generations, though he offered little else. He spoke briefly of local Legenston mines, haunted by spirits, smugglers' coves hidden along the coast, but his words were measured, as if reluctant to reveal too much. When he departed, Holmes sat in silence, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "A man of parts, Watson," he murmured. "He knows more than he tells. Mark that." Our days settled into a rhythm dictated by the land and sea. Mornings were spent in long walks along the cliff paths, where gorse blazed yellow against a grey granite, and the air was thick with the scent of salt and heather. Holmes, ever the observer, would pause to examine a curiously shaped stone or the faint tracks of a hare in the sandy soil, his mind never wholly at rest. I marveled at the landscape's stark beauty, its rugged cliffs and hidden coves, so unlike the ordered chaos of London. Afternoons found us in the cottage, where I read or wrote in my journal, while Holmes turned to his portable chemical kit, a concession to his restless intellect. He had recently developed an interest in certain vegetable alkaloids, and the tiny kitchen became a laboratory filled with the acrid tints of reagents and the soft clink of glassware. "A fascinating compound, Watson," he remarked one day, holding a vial to the light. "In minute doses, it calms the nerves. In larger ones, it might drive a man to madness. Nature is a chemist of infinite subtlety." Evenings were spent by the fire, the wind howling outside, as we discussed matters both trivial and profound. Holmes, though outwardly relaxed, was never far from his analytical self. He spoke of the sea's rhythms, comparing them to the patterns of human behavior, and once remarked on the curious absence of crime in such a remote place. "The isolation breeds its own passions, Watson," he said, his eyes on the flames. "Mark my words, even here, the human heart harbors its secrets." I nodded, accustomed to his penchant for seeing mysteries where others saw only calm. On the third evening, as a storm gathered strength beyond the headland, the sea roaring like a living thing, our solitude was shattered. The door burst open, admitting a gust of rain-soaked wind and Mr. Mortimer Tregennis, his face ashen and his eyes wild with terror. His coat dripped onto the flagstones, and his hands trembled as he clutched the table's edge. "Mr. Holmes," he gasped, his voice hoarse, "you must come at once. A horror has befallen my family, my brothers, my sister struck down by some unimaginable calamity." Holmes was on his feet in an instant, his wariness banished by the scent of a puzzle. "Compose yourself, Mr. Tregennis," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "Tell us exactly what has occurred." Tregennis, struggling to steady his breath, recounted a tale so bizarre that even I, seasoned by years of Holmes's cases, felt a chill of dread. His two brothers, Owen and George, and his sister, Brenda, lived together in the vicarage at Tredannick Wallars, a stone's throw from the village. That morning, their maid had arrived to find them seated around the dining table, the remnants of a card game before them. Owen and George were raving, their faces twisted in maniacal laughter, while Brenda sat lifeless, her eyes wide with terror, her heart stilled forever. The local doctor, summoned in haste, could offer no explanation beyond nervous shock for the brothers and heart failure for Brenda. Holmes's face was a mask of concentration, his fingers drumming lightly on the arm of his chair. "You were with them last night?" he asked sharply. Tregennis nodded, explaining that he had joined them for an evening of whist, a family ritual, and had left them in good spirits shortly before midnight. "And you noticed nothing unusual? No strange smells, no odd behavior?" Tregennis shook his head, his distress palpable. "Nothing, Mr. Holmes. It was an evening like any other." Holmes rose, his movements brisk and purposeful. "We shall go at once, Watson. Fetch your coat and revolver. This is no common matter." To Tregennis, he added, "You will accompany us and recount every detail, however trivial." As we donned our coats and stepped into the storm, the wind tearing at our clothes, I felt a growing unease. The wild cliffs, the roaring sea, the darkness pressing in all seemed to presage a mystery as deep and unfathomable as the ocean itself. The journey to Tredannick Wallars was a battle against the elements. The lanes slick with mud and the lanterns, light feeble against the deluge. Tregennis led the way, his figure hunched against the gale, while Holmes strode beside him, his mind no doubt racing through possibilities. I followed, my medical bag slung over my shoulder, my thoughts a tumult of curiosity and apprehension. What could have caused such a catastrophe? A poison, perhaps, or some rare contagion? The answers lay ahead, in the grim vicarage that loomed. Out of the darkness, its stone walls stark against the storm. Chapter 2. The Tregennis Tragedy. The storm that battered the Cornish coast on that fateful evening seemed a fitting prelude to the grim scene awaiting us at Tredannick Wallars. The wind howled like a chorus of lost souls, and the rain lashed our faces as we followed Mortimer Tregennis through the sodden lanes to the vicarage. Sherlock Holmes, his tall figure cloaked against the gale, moved with a purposeful stride, his eyes gleaming with the intensity that always marked the onset of a new investigation. I clutched my medical bag, my heart heavy with foreboding, for Tregennis's tale of madness and death had stirred in me a sense of unease unlike any I had felt in our many adventures. The vicarage, a squat, grey stone building nestled in a hollow, loomed ahead, its windows dark save for a faint glow from the dining room where the tragedy had unfolded. As we approached, the local constable, Mr. Penrose, met us at the door. He was a burly man with a weathered face, his eyes betraying the shock of what he had witnessed. "It's a bad business, Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice low. "I've seen naught like it in all my years." He led us inside, where the air was thick with the scent of damp stone and dying embers. The vicarage was modest but well kept, its walls adorned with faded tapestries and a few family portraits, their stern faces seeming to watch our progress. Tregennis, still trembling, hung back, his gaze fixed on the floor as if unable to face what lay beyond. The dining room was a tableau of horror frozen in time. 3 chairs were drawn close to a round oak table, its surface littered with playing cards and half-empty glasses of claret. The fire in the grate had burned low, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. Owen and George Tregennis, the surviving brothers, had been removed to the care of the village doctor, but their sister Brenda remained where she had been found. She sat upright in her chair, her delicate hands folded in her lap, her face a mask of terror so vivid that it seemed she might yet cry out. Her eyes, wide and unseeing, stared into some unimaginable abyss, and her lips were parted in a silent scream. I knelt beside her, my medical instincts overriding my shock, but a cursory examination confirmed what the local doctor had concluded. Her heart had ceased, likely from sheer fright or some catastrophic nervous shock. Holmes, unmoved by the grim spectacle, began his examination with the precision of a scientist. He circled the room, his keen eyes taking in every detail: the scattered cards, the position of the chairs, the faint smudge of ash on the table's edge. He paused at the mantel, where a small brass lamp stood, its wick charred, and a peculiar residue of grey powder within its bowl. "Curious," he murmured, producing a small envelope and carefully collecting a sample of the ash. He then turned to the window, which stood slightly ajar, and examined the sill, where faint traces of soot were visible. "What do you make of this, Watson?" he asked, his voice calm but expectant. I confessed my bafflement. "It is as if some sudden madness seized them all," I said. "But what could cause such a thing? Poison, perhaps, in the wine." Holmes shook his head, his lips curling in a faint smile. "The wine glasses are unevenly consumed, and the symptoms you describe, madness in the brothers, terror in the sister, suggest something more subtle than a liquid toxin. No, what's in this is a poison of the air, administered with diabolical cunning." His words sent a chill through me, for the idea of an invisible agent striking without warning was as sinister as it was novel. Tregennis, hovering at the doorway, was summoned by Holmes for questioning. His account was halting but consistent. He had visited his siblings the previous evening for their customary game of whist, a tradition born of their close-knit, if sometimes fractious, family ties. They had played until nearly midnight, the mood light and untroubled, and he had left them in good spirits, retiring to his own lodgings a mile away. "I saw nothing amiss," he insisted, his voice cracking. "They were laughing, talking of old times. How could this happen?" Holmes's eyes narrowed as he pressed Tregennis on the details. Had anyone else visited? Was the lamp lit during the game? Had there been any unusual smells or sounds? Tregennis denied all, though his agitation grew under Holmes's relentless scrutiny. "Think carefully, Mr. Tregennis," Holmes said, his tone sharp. "The smallest detail may be the key to this horror." Tregennis shook his head, his hands twisting together. "I swear, Mr. Holmes, there was nothing. The lamp was not lit. We used candles. The room was warm, the fire high. I left them, as I always did." Holmes dismissed him with a curt nod, but as Tregennis retreated, I caught a flicker of something in his eyes: fear, perhaps, or guilt. Holmes, too, seemed to note it, for he murmured, "There is more here than meets the eye, Watson. Our host is not entirely forthcoming." The constable, who had been observing in silence, ventured a question. "Do you reckon it's foul play, sir, or some queer illness?" Holmes's response was measured. "It is too early to say, Mr. Penrose, but I suspect a human hand at work. The ash in the lamp, the open window, these are not the marks of chance." He instructed Penrose to secure the room and allow no one to disturb it, then turned to me. Come, Watson, we shall return to the cottage. There is much to consider, and I must consult certain references before we proceed. As we stepped back into the storm, the vicarage receding into the darkness, I could not shake the image of Brenda Tregennis's face, nor the thought of her brothers, driven to madness by some unseen force. Holmes, however, was already deep in thought, his mind racing through possibilities as the wind tore at his coat. "This is no ordinary crime, Watson," he said, his voice barely audible above the gale. "We are dealing with a mind of singular ingenuity and a weapon as subtle as it is deadly." Back at the cottage, Holmes retired to the sitting room, where he lit a pipe and sat in silence, the glow of the fire illuminating his sharp features. I attempted to engage him, but he waved me off, his thoughts elsewhere. At length, he rose and retrieved a worn volume from the shelf, one of the books left by a previous tenant. It was a treatise on Cornish flora, its pages yellowed but meticulously annotated. Holmes turned to a passage on rare plants, his finger tracing the lines as he read aloud Radix Pedges Diaboli, known to the ancients as the devil's foot, a plant of such potency that its fumes, when burned, may induce visions, madness, or death. He closed the book with a snap, his eyes alight. "This, Watson, may be the key. Tomorrow we shall test my hypothesis." As I retired to my room, the storm raging outside, I could not help but feel that we stood on the edge of a mystery as dark and unfathomable as the Cornish sea. Holmes's words echoed in my mind, "A weapon as subtle as it is deadly." What manner of fiend could wield such a thing, and to what end? The answers, I knew, lay in the days ahead, and in the relentless mind of Sherlock Holmes. Chapter 3. The scene of the horror of the storm had abated by the time we returned to the vicarage at Tradenick Wallas the following morning, but a heavy mist clung to the Cornish landscape, shrouding the cliffs and lending an eerie stillness to the air. Sherlock Holmes, invigorated by the mystery that now consumed him, strode ahead with a briskness that belied his recent frailty. His eyes, sharp and restless, scanned the surroundings as if the very stones might yield some clue to the tragedy we had come to unravel. I followed, my medical bag in hand, my mind still haunted by the image of Brenda Tregennis's terror-stricken face and the thought of her brothers, now confined to the village doctor's care, their minds shattered by some incomprehensible force. Mortimer Tregennis, our guide, trailed behind, his face pale and drawn, his silence broken only by the occasional shudder that betrayed his distress. The vicarage stood as we had left it, its grey stone walls sombre against the mist, its windows reflecting the dull light like unblinking eyes. Constable Penrose awaited us at the door, his burly frame filling the threshold. "I've kept the place locked, Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice gruff but tinged with unease. "No one's been in since you left last night." Holmes nodded, his expression unreadable, and stepped inside, his movements precise and deliberate. The air within was cold and heavy, carrying the faint scent of wax and wood smoke, and the oppressive silence seemed to press against us as we crossed the hall to the dining room. The scene within was unchanged, a frozen tableau of horror that seemed to mock the ordinary domesticity of its setting. The round oak table, strewn with playing cards, stood at the center, surrounded by 3 chairs, one of which still bore the invisible weight of Brenda Tregennis's lifeless form, though her body had been removed to the village morgue. The half-empty glasses of claret gleamed dully in the morning light, and the fireplace, its embers now cold, cast a faint shadow across the flagged floor. Holmes paused at the threshold, his gaze sweeping the room with the intensity of a hawk. "Observe, Watson," he said, his voice low but commanding. "Every detail, however small, may hold the key to this enigma." He began his examination with a methodical thoroughness that was almost surgical. He knelt by the table, studying. The arrangement of the cards, a game of whist, interrupted mid-play, with the ace of spades ominously. He noted the positions of the chairs, slightly askew, as if their occupants had shifted in sudden agitation. The glasses drew his attention next. He sniffed each one, his brow furrowing slightly, then set them aside with a shake of his head. "No poison in the wine, Watson," he murmured. "The glasses show no residue beyond the claret, and the quantities consumed vary too greatly to suggest a uniform dose." His attention turned to the mantel, where the small brass lamp stood, its wick blackened and a faint pile of grey ash within its bowl. Holmes produced a magnifying glass and examined the lamp closely, his fingers tracing the rim with care. "This is the crux of the matter," he said, scooping a pinch of the ash into a small envelope. "The residue is not from oil or wax, but from some organic compound burned deliberately." He moved to the window, which remained slightly ajar, and inspected the sill, where traces of soot were visible against the weathered wood. "See here, Watson," he called, beckoning me over. "These marks suggest something was removed through this aperture. The soot is fresh, and the window was opened not long before the tragedy." I peered at the sill, noting the faint smudges, but their significance eluded me. "Could it have been a draught carrying the ash?" I ventured. Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. "A draught does not leave such precise marks, nor does it account for the lamp's contents. No, Watson, this was no accident. We are dealing with a calculated act, executed with a precision that borders on the diabolical." Holmes continued, his circuit of the room, his eyes darting from floor to ceiling, taking in the faded wallpaper, the heavy curtains, and the worn rug beneath the table. He paused by the fireplace, sifting through the ashes with a poker, but found nothing of note. "The fire was high last night, according to Tregennis," he remarked, "yet it burned out quickly, leaving little residue. Curious." He straightened, his gaze returning to the lamp. "The answer lies there, Watson. This ash, this lamp, they are the instruments of the crime." Turning to Constable Penrose, who had been watching with a mixture of awe and apprehension, Holmes inquired about the brother's condition. "There with Dr. Richards in the village," Penrose replied, "raving still, sir, laughing and muttering like men possessed. The doctor says it's a nervous collapse, but he's never seen the like." Holmes nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And the maid who found them, what is her account?" Penrose recounted the maid's story. She had arrived at 7 that morning, as was her custom, and found the Tregennis siblings, as described Doan and George, gibbering, Brenda dead. She had seen no one else, heard nothing unusual, and the house was locked, save for the dining room window. Holmes then summoned Tregennis, who had lingered in the hall, his face a mask of grief. "Mr. Tregennis," Holmes began, his tone measured, but piercing, "you are certain you noticed nothing out of the ordinary last night? No visitors, no strange odors, no flicker of the lamp?" Tregennis shook his head, his hands clasped tightly. "I swear it, Mr. Holmes. We played cards, we talked, we laughed. The candles were lit, the fire warm. I left them well and happy." His voice broke, and he turned away, but Holmes's eyes remained fixed on him, searching for some crack in his composure. You mentioned no lamp was used, Holmes pressed. Yet this one bears signs of recent burning. Can you account for that? Tregenus hesitated, his eyes flickering to the mantel. I don't know, sir. Perhaps the maid lit it this morning, or I cannot say. Holmes's gaze hardened, but he said nothing, merely nodding for Tregenus to step aside. To me, he murmured, he is holding something back, Watson. His distress is genuine, but there is a shadow behind it, fear, perhaps, or guilt. We spent another hour in the room, Holmes taking measurements and sketching the layout in his notebook. He examined the cards again, noting their arrangement as if they might spell out some hidden message. He tested the window's hinges, confirming it could be opened from the outside, and scraped more of the soot from the sill for later analysis. At length, he declared himself satisfied. We have what we need for now, Watson, he said, pocketing his envelope of ash. Let us return to the cottage. I must consult my references and conduct an experiment. As we left the mist had begun to lift, revealing the stark beauty of the Cornish landscape, the rugged cliffs, the distant sea, the rolling moors. Yet the weight of the tragedy lingered, a darkness that no sunlight could dispel. Holmes was silent as we walked, his mind no doubt racing through possibilities, sifting clues with that relentless logic that was his hallmark. I, too, was lost in thought, grappling with the mystery of a crime that seemed to defy reason. What could reduce two men to madness and kill a woman with terror, all within the confines of a locked room? The answer, I felt certain, lay in the ash Holmes had so carefully collected, and in the keen intellect that would unravel its secrets. Back at the cottage, Holmes retreated to the sitting room, where he spread his notes on the table and lit his pipe, the smoke curling around him like a shroud. He opened the volume on Cornish flora he had consulted the previous night, his fingers tracing the passage on Radix pedis diaboli. This plant, Watson, he said, his voice low and intense, holds the key. Its fumes are a poison of the mind, capable of inducing the very symptoms we have witnessed. Tonight, we shall test its properties, but with utmost caution. His words, though calm, carried a warning, and I felt a shiver of apprehension at the thought of what lay ahead, as the day waned and the shadows lengthened. The mystery of the Tregenus tragedy seemed to deepen, its tendrils reaching into the very heart of this wild and lonely place. Holmes, undaunted, was already planning his next move, his mind a beacon in the gathering dark. Chapter 4. The Devil's Foot. The mist that had cloaked the Cornish cliffs at dawn had given way to a crisp, clear afternoon, the sea sparkling under a pale sun as Sherlock Holmes and I sat in the modest sitting room of our Poldhu Bay cottage. The events at the vicarage lingered in my mind, the ghastly image of Brenda Tregenus's frozen terror, and the mad ravings of her brothers casting a shadow over the wild beauty outside. Holmes, however, was wholly absorbed in the puzzle before us, his lean frame bent over the deal table, where he had spread out his notes, the envelope of ash from the vicarage lamp, and the worn volume on Cornish flora. His pipe, clenched between his teeth, sent curls of smoke into the air, and his grey eyes burned with the intensity of a man on the scent of truth. Watson, he said at length, tapping the open book, this Radix pedis diaboli, the devil's foot, is no mere botanical curiosity. Its properties, as described here, are nothing short of extraordinary. He read aloud, his voice precise. A rare plant, found in certain hollows of the Cornish moors, known to ancient herbalists for its potent narcotic effects. When burned, its fumes induce visions, delirium, or, insufficient quantity, death, by paralysis of the heart or mind. This, I am convinced, is the agent of the Tregennis tragedy. I leaned forward, my medical curiosity piqued, despite the grim implications. A plant that poisons through the air, I asked, is such a thing possible? Holmes's lips curved in a faint, mirthless smile. Possible, and indeed probable. The ash we found in the lamp, the soot on the windowsill, these are the fingerprints of a crime, as subtle as it is sinister. But we must be certain, tonight. We shall conduct an experiment to confirm my hypothesis. His words carried a weight that made me uneasy, for I knew Holmes's experiments often courted danger. Yet his resolve was unshakable, and I nodded, trusting in his judgment even as my heart misgave me. He rose and rummaged through his chemical kit, producing a small burner and a glass dish. From the envelope, he carefully extracted a pinch of the grey ash, placing it in the dish with the precision of a watchmaker. This residue, he said, is the combusted form of the devil's foot. Its effects, when inhaled, are rapid and profound. We must proceed with utmost caution, Watson, for even a small dose may prove perilous. He instructed me to open the cottage windows wide, ensuring a draught to disperse any fumes, and to stand ready to drag him to safety should the need arise. I agreed, my revolver at hand, though I confess the prospect of testing such a poison filled me with dread. Holmes lit the burner, a small flame flickering beneath the dish. The ash began to smoulder, releasing a thin wisp of smoke that carried a faint, acrid odor, unlike anything I had encountered. Almost at once, I felt a creeping unease, a sense of oppression that seemed to weigh upon my chest. Holmes, standing closer to the source, swayed slightly, his eyes glazing over as he gripped the table's edge. "Watson," he gasped, his voice thick. The window now. I lunged forward, seizing his arm and pulling him toward the open window, where the cold sea air rushed in, dispelling the fumes. We stumbled outside, collapsing onto the grass, our breaths ragged as the clean breeze restored us. For a moment, we lay there, the roar of the sea a stark contrast to the silent terror we had just escaped. Holmes was the first to recover, sitting up with a grim smile. "A most instructive experiment, Watson," he said, his voice regaining its strength. "The devil's foot is indeed the culprit. Its effects are instantaneous disorientation, hallucination, and, in a stronger dose, likely death." Brenda Tregennis succumbed to its lethal embrace, while her brothers, perhaps exposed to a lesser quantity, were driven to madness. I shuddered, the memory of that brief exposure still vivid. But how was it administered? I asked. The lamp in the vicarage was not lit, according to Tregennis. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Precisely, Watson. That is the heart of the matter. The lamp was used after Tregennis's departure, or he is lying about its use. The soot on the window suggests the fumes were directed into the room, perhaps from outside. We are dealing with a mind of fiendish ingenuity." He rose, brushing the grass from his coat, and returned to the cottage, where he extinguished the burner and sealed the remaining ash in a vial. "We must trace the source of this substance," he said. "It is not a common plant, and its procurement suggests knowledge and intent." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sea with streaks of gold and crimson, Holmes pored over the volume on Cornish flora, cross-referencing it with his notes. He spoke of the plant's rarity, known only to a few local herbalists and scholars of antiquities. "It grows in remote parts of the moors," he said, "and its use requires expertise." Whoever employed it knew precisely what they were doing. I suggested the possibility of a local apothecary or botanist, but Holmes shook his head. This is no village herbalist's work, Watson. The precision, the secrecy, it points to someone with both access and motive. Our conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Constable Penrose stood there, his face grim. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Holmes," he said, "but there's news from the village. The Tregennis brothers Owen and George, they're worsening. Dr. Richards says they're raving still. Speaking of devils and shadows, he fears they may not recover." Holmes's expression darkened, but he nodded. "Thank you, Penrose. Keep me informed of their condition." As the constable departed, Holmes turned to me, his voice low. "Time is against us, Watson. The poison's effects are persistent, and we must act swiftly to uncover the truth." He returned to his notes, sketching a diagram of the vicarage, dining room, and marking the positions of the lamp, window, and chairs. "The key lies in the delivery," he mused. "The open window, the soot, the ashal, suggest an external application. Someone stood outside that room, burning the devil's foot and letting its fumes seep in. But why, and who?" He paused, his gaze distant. Mortimer Tregennis's account does not hold water. His agitation, his evasiveness, there is something he conceals. I ventured a theory. Could it be a family dispute? An inheritance, perhaps, or some old grudge? Holmes nodded slowly. "Possible, Watson, but the method is too elaborate for a mere domestic squabble. This speaks of a deeper motive, one rooted in knowledge and calculation. We must learn more of the Tregennis family and their connections." As night fell, the cottage grew quiet, save for the distant crash of waves and the occasional creak of the timbers. Holmes sat by the fire, his pipe forgotten, his mind a whirlwind of deduction. I watched him, marveling at the tenacity that drove him, even in this remote corner of England, to pursue the truth. The devil's foot, with its sinister power, had claimed one life and shattered two others, but I knew Holmes would not rest until he had unmasked the hand that wielded it. As I retired to my room, the weight of the mystery pressed upon me, and I wondered what further horrors awaited us in the days to come. Chapter 5. The suspect emerges the morning following our perilous experiment with the devil's foot dawned clear. The Cornish cliffs bathed in a soft light that belied the darkness of the mystery we pursued. Sherlock Holmes, restored by a few hours of restless sleep, was already at work when I entered the sitting room of our Poldhu Bay cottage. His lean frame was bent over the deal table, where he had arranged his notes, the vial of ash from the vicarage lamp, and a map of the surrounding moors, marked with cryptic annotations in his precise hand. His pipe, unlit, lay forgotten beside him, a sign that his mind was wholly consumed by the Tregennis tragedy. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and sea salt, and outside, the gulls wheeled with their mournful cries, as if echoing the sorrow that hung over Tregennic Wallers. "Watson," Holmes said without looking up, "we have confirmed the weapon Redix Pegis Diaboli, but the hand that wielded it remains elusive. Our task today is to narrow the field of suspicion." His voice was calm, but there was a steely edge to it, the mark of a man whose intellect was fully engaged. I nodded, settling into a chair, my thoughts still troubled by the memory of Brenda Tregennis's frozen terror and the raving madness of her brothers, Owen and George. "You suspect Mortimer Tregennis?" I ventured, recalling his agitation and evasive answers at the vicarage. Holmes's grey eyes flicked up to meet mine, a faint smile playing at his lips. "You are not entirely wide of the mark, Watson. But suspicion is not proof. Let us examine the man more closely. Holmes's inquiries began with a return to the vicarage, where Constable Penrose met us with a report on the Tregennis brothers. "They're no better, Mr. Holmes," he said, his weathered face grim. "Dr. Richards says they're still raving, speaking of shadows and devils, though they're weaker now. He fears they may not last the week." Holmes's expression remained impassive, but I saw the tightening of his jaw, a sign of the urgency that drove him. He thanked Penrose and led me back to the dining room, where the scene of the horror remained undisturbed, save for the absence of Brenda's body. The cards, the glasses, the charred lamp all stood as silent witnesses to the crime. Holmes's examination was brief but meticulous. He reinspected the lamp, confirming the presence of the same grey ash, and tested the window's hinges, noting their ease of movement. "The mechanism of the crime is clear," he said, his voice low. "The devil's foot was burned outside, its fumes directed through the window to overwhelm the occupants. But the motive, Watson, that is the crux. Mortimer Tregennis was here that night, and his account is riddled with inconsistencies." I recalled Tregennis's claim that the lamp was not lit, contradicted by the ash, and his nervous demeanor under Holmes's questioning. "Do you think him capable of such a deed?" I asked. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Capability is not the question. Motive and opportunity are. Let us speak with him again." We found Mortimer Tregennis at his lodgings, a small cottage a mile from the vicarage, its walls draped with ivy and its garden overgrown with gorse. He greeted us with a strained politeness, his lean face pale and his hands fidgeting as he invited us inside. The room was sparsely furnished, with a single table cluttered with books on Cornish history and a few faded photographs of his family. Holmes wasted no time on pleasantries. "Mr. Tregennis," he began, his tone sharp but controlled, "your account of the night of the tragedy does not align with the evidence. The lamp in the vicarage contained a residue that was burned after your departure. Can you explain this?" Tregennis's eyes widened, and he stammered, I told you, Mr. Holmes, the lamp was not lit. We used candles. Perhaps the maid." Holmes cut him off with a raised hand. "The maid denies lighting it, and the soot on the windowsill suggests an external source. You were the last to see your siblings alive. If you are withholding anything, now is the time to speak." Tregennis's composure faltered, his hands twisting together. "I swear I know nothing of it," he said, his voice rising. "I left them happy, laughing. This horritus beyond comprehension." Yet his eyes darted to the side, avoiding Holmes's piercing gaze, and I sensed a tremor of fear beneath his protestations. Holmes pressed further, his questions relentless. "You mentioned no visitors, no unusual smells or sounds, yet the evidence points to a deliberate act. Have you enemies, Mr. Tregennis, or did your siblings?" Tregennis shook his head, his voice barely a whisper. "We are a quiet family, Mr. Holmes. No enemies, no quarrels beyond the usual. I cannot fathom who would do this." Holmes leaned back, his fingers steepled, his expression unreadable. "Very well," he said at last, "but know this, the truth will out, and I shall find it." As we left, Holmes murmured to me, "He is hiding something, Watson. His grief is real, but it is mingled with guilt. We must look deeper into the Tregennis family." Back at the cottage, Holmes turned to his map of the moors, circling areas where Radix pedis diabole was known to grow. "The plant is rare," he said, "and its use requires knowledge. Tregennis, with his interest in local law, may have access to such knowledge, but we need more than suspicion. He proposed a visit to the village library, a small collection, housed in the church annex, to consult records on local botany and the Tregennis family's history. The librarian, an elderly woman with a keen memory, confirmed that Mortimer had borrowed books on Cornish flora in recent months, including one mentioning the Devil's Foot. He's always been curious about the old ways, she said, but he's a solitary sort, keeps to himself. Holmes's interest sharpened at this, and he spent the afternoon poring over parish records, tracing the Tregennis lineage. He uncovered a history of modest wealth derived from tin mining, but also hints of family tensions, disputes over inheritance, particularly after the death of their father a decade earlier. Money, Watson, Holmes said, his eyes gleaming. It is often the root of such evils. Mortimer, as the eldest, may have felt cheated by the division of the estate. But is that motive enough for so elaborate a crime? As evening fell, Holmes sat by the fire, his pipe now lit, the smoke curling around him like a halo. Tregennis is our chief suspect, he said, but we must consider others. The plant's rarity suggests a connection to someone with specialized knowledge, perhaps a scholar, a traveler, or a local herbalist. He paused, his gaze distant. Tomorrow, we shall explore the moors for the source of the Devil's Foot and inquire into any strangers in the area. This crime is too precise to be the work of a novice. I retired that night with a heavy heart, the weight of the mystery pressing upon me. Mortimer Tregennis's nervous demeanor, the sinister power of the Devil's Foot, the silent horror of the vicarage all pointed to a crime of chilling calculation. Holmes, undeterred, was already planning his next move, his mind a beacon in the gathering dark. As I drifted to sleep, the distant crash of waves seemed to echo the turmoil within, and I wondered what further revelations awaited us in this wild and haunted land. Chapter 6. A second horror, the dawn that followed our unsettling interrogation of Mortimer. Tregennis broke with a deceptive calm over Poldhu Bay, the sea a glassy expanse under a sky streaked with delicate pinks. Yet the serenity of the Cornish morning was shattered by a breathless fisherman who arrived at our cottage door, his face ashen and his words tumbling in a rush. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, come quick," he gasped. "It's Mr. Tregennis Mortimer, found dead in his lodgings, struck down like his sister." Sherlock Holmes, his fatigue banished by the scent of fresh calamity, was already donning his greatcoat, his grey eyes alight with a fierce intensity. I grabbed my medical bag, my heart pounding with the dread of another inexplicable horror, and we followed the fisherman into the misty lanes of Tregennis Wallers. The village was stirring with unease as we reached Mortimer's cottage, a modest dwelling cloaked in ivy, its small garden choked with gorse. A crowd of villagers had gathered, their whispers a low hum of fear and speculation, parted only by the imposing figure of Constable Penrose, who stood guard at the door. "It's a grim sight, Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice heavy. "Found just as the maid described, the other's face twisted in terror, dead as stone." Holmes nodded, his expression unreadable, and led the way inside. His movements swift and purposeful. The interior of Mortimer's cottage was Spartan, its single room dominated by a small table cluttered with books and papers, a narrow bed, and a single window overlooking the moors. Mortimer Tregennis sat slumped in a wooden chair, his body rigid, his face a grotesque mirror of his sister, Brenda's eyes wide with horror, mouth contorted in a silent scream. The air was thick with the faint, acrid scent I now recognized from our experiment with the devil's foot, and my stomach churned at the implication. Holmes, undeterred by the grim spectacle, began his examination with clinical precision, his gaze sweeping the room for clues. He paused at a small brass lamp. On a side table, its wick blackened and a familiar grey ash within its bowl. "The same method," he murmured, producing a small envelope and collecting a sample of the residue. He moved to the window, slightly ajar, and noted fresh soot marks on the sill, identical to those at the vicarage. "The devil's foot again." "Watson," he said, his voice low but resolute, "administered with the same cunning through the window, under cover of darkness." I knelt beside Mortimer, confirming death by heart failure, likely induced by the same terror that had claimed Brenda. "But who, Holmes?" I asked, my voice tight. "Mortimer was our suspect. Could he have been a victim all along?" Holmes's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the room. "A possibility, Watson, but unlikely. The pattern is too precise, the method too deliberate. This is no coincidence, but a calculated act, perhaps retribution for the first crime." He examined the table, where a half-written letter lay, its ink still wet. Addressed to no one, but filled with cryptic references to guilt and family secrets. "Mortimer knew more than he told us," Holmes said, pocketing the letter. "His death suggests someone else is at play, someone with access to the same deadly knowledge." We questioned the fisherman who had discovered the body after being summoned by a frantic neighbor. He reported no strangers seen that night, though the village had been abuzz with talk of curses since the vicarage tragedy. The neighbor, Anne, elderly woman, confirmed hearing a faint rustling outside Mortimer's window near midnight, but saw nothing through the fog. Holmes listened intently, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "The killer moves with stealth," he said, "and knows the terrain well. This is no outsider's work." Back at the cottage, Holmes spread his findings on the deal table, adding the new ash sample and the letter to his collection of clues. He paced the room, his mind a whirlwind of deduction. "The sequence is clear," he said. "Brenda and her brothers were struck first, by Mortimer's hand, I suspect, driven by some hidden motive, perhaps greed or resentment. But Mortimer's death suggests a second player, one who knew of his guilt and sought vengeance. I suggested a family rival or a local with knowledge of the devil's foot, but Holmes shook his head. The plant's rarity narrows the field. We must look to those with both motive and expertise, someone connected to the Tregennis family, yet apart from it. He turned to his map of the moors, circling areas where Radix Pedis Diaboli might be found, and noted a name mentioned in village gossip: Dr. Leon Sterndale, a distant cousin and explorer recently returned from Africa. Sterndale's knowledge of exotic plants makes him a figure of interest, Holmes said. We shall seek him out tomorrow. His presence in Tredannick Wallace at this time cannot be mere chance. I felt a chill at the thought of another suspect, one whose worldly experience might rival the cunning of the crime as night fell. The cottage was enveloped in the sea's relentless roar, a sound that seemed to underscore the growing complexity of the case. Holmes sat by the fire, his pipe unlit, his gaze fixed on the flames. This is no simple feud, Watson, he said. We are dealing with a mind of diabolical ingenuity, one that wields the devil's foot with surgical precision. Mortimer's death is but the second act in this tragedy, and I fear the curtain has not yet fallen. I retired with a heavy heart, the image of Mortimer's contorted face seared into my memory, and wondered What further horrors awaited us in this wild and haunted land? Chapter 7. The African Connection. The morning after Mortimer Tregennis's death broke over Poldhu Bay with a chill clarity. The sea, a restless expanse of grey beneath a sky streaked with clouds. The double tragedy, the horror at the victim, and now the death of our erstwhile suspect, had cast a pall over the Cornish landscape, transforming its wild beauty into something ominous. Sherlock Holmes, however, was undeterred, his mind a crucible of relentless deduction. As I entered the sitting room of our cottage, I found him already at work, his lean figure bent over the deal table, where maps, notes, and the vial of ash from Mortimer's lamp were spread in meticulous order. His pipe lay unlit, a sign of his complete absorption, and his grey eyes gleamed with the intensity of a hunter closing in on his quarry. "Watson," he said, glancing up. "The death of Mortimer Tregennis has shifted the landscape of this case. We are no longer dealing with a single act of malice, but a chain of calculated murders. The devil's foot is the key, and its rarity points us beyond these moors." He tapped a map, his finger resting on a circled area where Radix pedis diaboli was known to grow, then turned to a telegram received that morning from Constable Penrose. "A stranger has been noted in Tredannick Wallace," he said, "a man of some distinction, recently returned from abroad. We must investigate this lead at once." The stranger, we learned, was Dr. Leon Stwell, a renowned explorer and naturalist, known for his expeditions in Africa and his writings on rare flora and fauna. A distant cousin of the Tregennis family, he had arrived in the village shortly before the first tragedy, lodging at a small inn near the church. His presence, coupled with his expertise, piqued Holmes's interest, and we set out to find him. The wind sharp with the scent of salt and gorse as we traversed the lane to Wallace. Sterndale's lodgings were modest, a room above the inn with a view of the moors. He greeted us with a guarded courtesy, his imposing figure filling the doorway. He was a man of perhaps 50, broad-shouldered and weathered, with a mane of grizzled hair and eyes that burned with a fierce intelligence. His manner was stern, almost forbidding, yet there was a weariness about him, as if the weight of his travels had left a mark. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice deep and measured, "I have heard of your presence here. I assume you come about the Tregennis tragedy." Holmes wasted no time. "Dr. Sterndale, you are a man of science and a traveller. The agent of these deaths is a rare plant, Radix pedis diaboli, known to few. Have you encountered it in your studies?" Sterndale's eyes flickered, but he met Holmes's gaze steadily. "I have," he admitted. "In Africa, among certain tribes of the interior, it is used in rituals. Its fumes induce visions, or, in larger doses, death. I have seen its effects firsthand." He paused, his jaw tightening. "But I assure you, I have no part in this horror." Holmes's questions grew sharper. "You arrived in Tredannick Wallace shortly before the first tragedy. Where were you on the night Brenda Tregennis died?" Sterndale's expression hardened. "I was here, in my room, writing letters. I had no reason to visit the vicarage." Holmes pressed further, noting Sterndale's familiarity with the Tregennis family. "As their cousin, you must know their history, any quarrels, any secrets." Sterndale shook his head, but his hesitation was palpable. "They were a private family," he said. "I saw them rarely, though I was fond of Brenda. She was a remarkable woman." Holmes's eyes narrowed at this, catching the faint tremor in Sterndale's voice. "And the night of Mortimer's death?" he asked. Sterndale claimed he had been walking the moors, seeking solitude, and had seen no one. Yet his answers, though forthright, carried a guarded quality that Holmes noted with a subtle nod. "One final question, Dr. Sterndale," he said. "Have you ever handled Radix pedis diaboli yourself?" Sterndale's face darkened. "I have collected specimens, yes, for my studies, but I keep them under lock and key." "If you imply," Holmes raised a hand, cutting him off. "I imply nothing, sir. I seek only facts." We left the inn, Holmes silent but thoughtful as we walked back through the village. "Sterndale knows more than he reveals," he murmured. "His connection to the plant and his presence here are no coincidence." I suggested that Sterndale's expertise made him a likely suspect, but Holmes cautioned against haste. "He has the knowledge, Watson, but motive is lacking. We must dig deeper." With Penrose's aid, we obtained permission to search Sterndale's lodgings later that day, while he was reportedly out on the moors. The room was sparse, its shelves lined with books on botany and African ethnology. In a locked box beneath the bed, Holmes found a small vial containing dried fibrous material, unmistakably the root of the devil's foot. "This confirms it," he said, sealing the vial in an envelope. "Sterndale has access to the poison, but did he use it, or was it taken from him?" The absence of ash or a lamp in the room suggested the latter, but Holmes's expression remained guarded. "We are close, Watson, but the puzzle is not yet complete." Back at the cottage, Holmes spread his findings on the table, adding the vial to his collection of clues. He consulted his notes, cross-referencing Sterndale's travels with the Tregennis family history. A letter from the village postmaster revealed that Sterndale had corresponded with Brenda Tregennis in recent years, though the contents were unknown. "A connection," Watson Holmes said, his eyes gleaming. "Sterndale and Brenda shared more than kinship. We must learn its nature." As night fell, the sea's roar filled the cottage, a reminder of the wild forces surrounding us. Holmes sat by the fire, his pipe now lit, the smoke curling around him as he sifted through possibilities. "Sterndale is our link to the devil's foot," he said, "but whether he is the killer or a pawn remains to be seen. Tomorrow we shall confront him with this evidence and watch his reaction." I felt a growing unease for the explorers. Stern demeanor and exotic knowledge suggested a man capable of great deeds or great crimes. The African connection had deepened the mystery, and I wondered what further secrets lay hidden in the heart of this desolate land. Chapter 8. The motive unraveled. The morning light filtered through the cottage windows at Poldhu Bay, casting long shadows across the flagged floor as Sherlock Holmes and I prepared to confront the enigma that had deepened with each passing day. The deaths of Brenda Tregennis and her brother Mortimer, both struck down by the sinister fumes of the Radix pedis diaboli, had transformed our Cornish retreat into a crucible of mystery. Holmes, his lean frame taut with purpose, stood at the deal table, his notes and the vial of dried root from Dr. Leon Sterndale's lodgings arranged before him. His grey eyes, sharp as ever, betrayed no trace of the fatigue that had brought us here, only the relentless drive of a mind closing in on truth. "Watson," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "today we shall lay bare the heart of this affair. Sterndale's connection to the devil's foot is undeniable, but the motive for these crimes remains elusive. We must probe the ties between him and the Tregennis family, particularly Brenda." He tapped a small bundle of letters, retrieved from the vicarage with Constable Penrose's aid, their faded ink hinting at a correspondence spanning years. "These may hold the key," he added, "but first, we returned to Tredennick, Wallace, to face Sterndale. The village lay quiet under a sky heavy with clouds. The sea's restless murmur a constant undertone as we approached the inn where Sterndale lodged. The explorer was in his room, his imposing figure framed against the window, his grizzled features set in a mask of guarded expectation. "Mr. Holmes," he said, rising as we entered, "I anticipated your return. Have you come to accuse me?" His tone was steady, but there was a wariness in his eyes that Holmes noted with a subtle nod. "Double quotes, Dr. Sterndale." Holmes began, his voice calm but piercing. "You have admitted knowledge of Radix pedis diaboli and its lethal properties. We found a sample in your possession, and the method of the Tregennis deaths points to its use. I ask you plainly, what is your role in this tragedy?" Sterndale's jaw tightened, and for a moment he seemed to weigh his words. Then, with a sigh, he sank into a chair, his stern demeanor softening. "I am no murderer, Mr. Holmes," he said, "but I will tell you what I know, for Brenda's sake." He spoke then of a bond with Brenda Tregennis, one that had grown over years of correspondence and rare visits. "She was a woman of rare spirit," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We shared a love, unspoken but deep, though her family ties in my travels kept us apart. I returned to Cornwall hoping to persuade her to leave with me, to start anew." His eyes darkened. "But I found her entangled in a web of family discord, particularly with Mortimer." Holmes leaned forward, his gaze intent. "What discord?" Sterndale explained that Mortimer, as the eldest, had long sought to control the family's modest inheritance, a legacy from their father's tin mining ventures. Brenda, strong-willed and independent, resisted his attempts to dominate her share, leading to bitter quarrels. Mortimer was envious, Sterndale said, and resentful of Brenda's affection for me. I believe he saw her as a threat to his authority. Holmes produced the vial of dried root, holding it up. "And this, did Mortimer have access to your collection?" Sterndale's face paled. "He visited me here, weeks ago, under the guise of family interest. I showed him my specimens, including the devil's foot, as a curiosity. I did not think," he broke off, his hands clenching. "If he took some, I was unaware, but it explains the horror at the vicarage." Holmes's questions grew sharper, probing Sterndale's movements on the nights of the deaths. Sterndale admitted to walking the moors the night Brenda died, but claimed he was far from the vicarage, grappling with his own turmoil. For Mortimer's death, he had no alibi beyond a late-night stroll, but his voice carried a conviction that gave Holmes pause. "You loved Brenda," Holmes said, his tone almost gentle. "Did you seek vengeance for her death?" Sterndale's eyes flashed. "If I had known Mortimer's hand in it, I might have. But I did not act, Mr. Holmes. I swear it." Holmes sat back, his fingers steepled, his mind sifting Sterndale's words. "Your story holds, for now," he said, "but the truth will out." We left the inn, Holmes silent as we walked the village lanes, the weight of Sterndale's confession hanging between us. Back at the cottage, Holmes spread the letters from Brenda's room on the table, their contents revealing a woman torn between duty to her family and a longing for freedom with Sterndale. One letter, written months earlier, hinted at Mortimer's growing resentment, his accusations that Brenda was squandering their legacy. "The motive is clear," Holmes said, his voice low. "Mortimer, envious and controlling, used the devil's foot to eliminate his siblings, believing it would secure his inheritance and punish Brenda's defiance. He stole the root from Sterndale, unaware that his own death would follow. Frowned, puzzled. But who killed Mortimer? Holmes's eyes gleamed. Sterndale, Watson. His love for Brenda and his knowledge of the plant make him the only plausible agent. He suspected Mortimer's guilt and exacted retribution using the same method. To test this, Holmes proposed a final confrontation. We returned to the inn that evening, finding Sterndale packing his belongings, as if preparing to flee. Holmes laid out the evidence, the letters, the vial, the identical methods of death. "You loved Brenda Tregennis," he said, his voice relentless. "When you realized Mortimer's role in her death, you used your own supply of the devil's foot to avenge her. Admit it, sir." Sterndale's shoulders slumped, and he nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "I could not let her death go unpunished. I burned the root outside his window, as he had done to her. It was justice." Holmes's face was stern, but there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "Justice or vengeance, Dr. Sterndale, you have taken a life." Yet he made no move to summon Penrose. Instead, he fixed Sterndale with a piercing gaze. "Leave Cornwall, sir, and never return. The law may not touch you, but I shall know where to find you." Sterndale nodded, his face etched with grief, and we left him to his preparations. As we walked back through the darkening lanes, the sea's roar a somber accompaniment, I marveled at Holmes's judgment. "You let him go," I said. Holmes's lips twitched. "Sometimes, Watson, justice lies beyond the law's reach. Sterndale's crime was born of love, and he will carry its weight to his grave." The motive, at last unraveled, cast a bitter light on the Tregennis tragedy, and I felt the chill of the Cornish night more keenly than ever. Chapter 9. The Moral Dilemma. Twilight deepened over Poldhu Bay. The sea's ceaseless murmur blending with the mournful cry of gulls, as Sherlock Holmes and I made our way back to the cottage from our confrontation with Dr. Leon Sterndale. The weight of his confession that he had used the deadly radix pedis diaboli to avenge Brenda Tregennis by killing her brother Mortimer hung heavily between us. Holmes's decision to let Sterndale go free, to walk away from the crime unpunished by the law, was a departure from his usual insistence on justice, and it stirred in me a tumult of questions. The Cornish cliffs, stark and shadowed, seemed to mirror the moral ambiguity that now clouded our path. Inside the cottage, the fire cast a warm glow over the sitting room, but the air felt chill with the gravity of what had transpired. Holmes sank into an armchair, his lean frame relaxed, yet his eyes alert, as if still wrestling with the implications of his choice. I took the opposite chair, my mind racing. "Holmes," I ventured, breaking the silence, "you let Sterndale go, a confessed murderer, allowed to walk free. Why?" His gaze flicked to me, sharp and contemplative, and for a moment he said nothing, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Watson," he replied at length, his voice low and measured, "we are not the law, nor are we its arbiters. Our task is to uncover truth, not to bind men's fates to the gallows. Sterndale's act was a crime, yes, but it was born of a love so profound that it drove him to vengeance. Mortimer Tregennis, by his own hand, destroyed his sister and drove his brothers to madness. Can we say Sterndale's retribution was wholly unjust?" His words, calm and reasoned, carried a weight that challenged my sense of right and wrong. I shifted uneasily, the fire's crackle filling the pause. "But the law, Holmes, does it not demand accountability? If every man took justice into his own hands, we'd have chaos." Holmes's lips curved in a faint, wistful smile. The law is a blunt instrument, Watson. It sees only black and white, guilt or innocence. Life, as you know, is painted in shades of grey. Sterndale is no hardened criminal, no menace to society. His crime was singular, driven by grief, and he will carry its burden to his grave. To deliver him to a cell would serve no purpose but to satisfy a rigid code. I pondered this, recalling Sterndale's broken demeanour, the raw pain in his eyes, as he spoke of Brenda. Yet the image of Mortimer's terror-stricken face, so like his sister's, lingered in my mind. And what of the Tregennis brothers, Owen and George? I asked. They linger in madness, their lives shattered. Does Sterndale's motive excuse the suffering left in his wake? Holmes's expression darkened, and he leaned forward, his voice taking on a quieter intensity. It does not excuse it, Watson, but it explains it. The brothers' fate is a tragedy, but their ruin was Mortimer's doing, not Sterndale's. To punish the avenger while the instigator lies dead is to chase shadows. He rose and paced the room, his silhouette sharp against the firelight. Consider the evidence, he continued. The devil's foot is a weapon of such subtlety that it leaves no trace for the law to grasp. The ash, the soot, the open window, these are clues only we have pieced together. A court would flounder, and Sterndale, a man of means and reputation, might well escape conviction. Yet he confessed to us, freely and without coercion. That, Watson, is a rare thing, a man who accepts his guilt and seeks no evasion. I nodded, seeing the logic, but still troubled. And if he kills again, if his grief drives him to further vengeance? Holmes stopped pacing, his eyes meeting mine with unwavering certainty. He will not. I saw it in his face, a man broken by his own act, bound for exile in Africa, where he will live out his days in solitude. I extracted his vow never to return to England, and I believe he will keep it. My judgment is not infallible, Watson, but it is informed by observation. Sterndale is no threat. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney, and I considered Holmes's words. His decision, though unconventional, was not without precedent. I recalled other cases where he had bent the rules of justice, thieves spared, secrets kept when the greater good demanded it. Yet this case, with its toll of death and madness, felt heavier, its moral lines blurred by passion and retribution. You take a great risk, Holmes, I said at last. To let a murderer go free is to wager on human nature. He returned to his chair, his expression softening. Human nature, Watson, is the one puzzle I shall never fully solve. But I wager on it daily, as do you in your practice. We weigh the heart as much as the evidence. He paused, his gaze drifting to the window where the sea's faint roar carried through the night. Sterndale's crime was a single act, born of love and loss. To condemn him would not undo the tragedy, nor restore Brenda or her brothers. Sometimes the truest justice is to let a man bear his own punishment. We sat in silence, the weight of his words settling over us. I thought of the Tregennis family, torn apart by greed and vengeance, and of Sterndale, now a wanderer, carrying the guilt of his deed across continents. Holmes's decision, though it chafed against my sense of order, bore the mark of his singular mind, a mind that saw not only the crime but the man behind it. As the fire burned low, I felt a reluctant acceptance, tempered by the knowledge that Holmes's judgment, however unorthodox, was guided by a deeper truth. Tomorrow, Holmes said, breaking the silence, we shall inform Constable Penrose. that the case is closed, the deaths attributed to an unknown poison, its source untraceable. The law will find no answers here, and the village will weave its tales of curses and spirits. He smiled faintly. Let them. The truth is ours, and it is enough. I nodded, though my heart remained heavy, and as I retired to my room, the Cornish night seemed to close around us, its secrets sealed by Holmes's choice. Chapter 10. The return to Baker Street. The Cornish dawn broke with a quiet splendor. The sea, a shimmering expanse of silver beneath a sky flushed with the first hues of morning. The wild cliffs of Poldhu Bay, which had borne witness to the grim drama of the Tregennis tragedy, stood resolute against the waves, their rugged beauty a stark contrast to the darkness we had unravelled. Sherlock Holmes, his health restored by the bracing air and the intellectual rigour of the case, stood at the cottage door, his lean figure silhouetted against the rising sun. His grey eyes, sharp and contemplative, surveyed the horizon as if bidding farewell to the mysteries of this desolate coast. I joined him, my medical bag packed, my journal heavy with the record of our strange adventure. "Watson," he said, turning to me with a faint smile, "this retreat has proven anything but restful, yet I find myself invigorated. The devil's foot has tested us, but it has also reminded me of the resilience of the human spirit and its capacity for both good and ill." His words carried a reflective note, a rare glimpse into the mind that had wrestled with the moral complexities of Dr. Leon Sterndale's confession and the decision to let him walk free. I nodded, still grappling with the weight of that choice, but trusting in Holmes's judgment. Forged as it was in the crucible of truth, our final morning in Cornwall was spent tying up the threads of the case. Holmes met with Constable Penrose at Tregennis Wallace, delivering a carefully crafted report that attributed the deaths of Brenda and Mortimer Tregennis to an unknown poison, its source untraceable. The ash in the lamps suggests a rare substance, perhaps of local origin, Holmes told the constable, his tone measured. But without further evidence, the matter must remain unresolved. Penrose, though visibly frustrated by the lack of a culprit, accepted the explanation, his practical mind content to let the village weave its tales of curses and spirits. The Tregennis brothers, Owen and George, remained under Dr. Rich's care, their minds still clouded by the fumes of the devil's foot, their recovery uncertain. Holmes expressed regret but no surprise, noting that the plant's effects could linger indefinitely. We returned to the cottage to gather our belongings, the simplicity of our surroundings now tinged with the memory of the horrors we had uncovered. Holmes packed his chemical kit and notes with meticulous care, pausing to examine the vial of Radix Pedis Diaboli ash one last time. "A remarkable substance, Watson," he mused, holding it to the light. "In the hands of science, it might yield insights into the mind's fragility. In the hands of a murderer, it becomes a weapon of unparalleled subtlety. We must ensure it does not fall into such hands again." He sealed the vial in a locked case, a precaution against its deadly power. As we boarded the cart for the station at Tregennis Wallace, the village seemed to exhale, its quiet streets and stone cottages resuming their timeless rhythm. The fisherman, who had brought news of Mortimer's death, waved us off, his face etched with the stoic acceptance of those who live by the sea's caprice. The journey to Penzance was uneventful, the rolling moors and ancient stone walls passing in a blur as I reflected on the case. The devil's foot, with its insidious ability to poison the mind, had revealed not only the depths of human malice, but also the complexities of justice. Holmes's decision to spare Sterndale, driven by a nuanced understanding of motive and remorse, lingered in my thoughts, a testament to his singular blend of logic and compassion. On the train to London, Holmes was unusually talkative, his mind freed from the case's grip. He spoke of the Cornish landscape, comparing its stark beauty to the clarity of a well-solved puzzle. "There is a lesson here, Watson," he said, his gaze fixed on the passing fields. "Science, unchecked, can unleash horrors as great as any superstition. The devil's foot is but a plant, yet in the wrong hands it becomes a demon. We who pursue knowledge must tread with care." I nodded, struck by the gravity of his words, and wondered how many other such dangers lay hidden in the world's wild places. We reached Baker Street late that evening, the familiar clutter of our rooms a welcome contrast to the austerity of the Cornish cottage. Mrs. Hudson greeted us with her usual warmth, a steaming supper waiting, and the gaslights cast a comforting glow over the shelves of books and the violin case in the corner. Holmes, settling into his armchair, lit his pipe and exhaled a cloud of smoke, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "A strange case, Watson," he said, "but not without its rewards. The truth is ours, and that is enough." I took up my pen to record the final details in my journal, the events of the Devil's Foot etched vividly in my memory. The tragedy of the Tregennis family, the vengeance of Leon Stendhal, the deadly power of a rare plantal had conspired to create one of Holmes's most extraordinary adventures. As I wrote, I glanced at my friend, his sharp profile softened by the firelight, and marveled at the mind that could navigate such shadows and emerge with clarity. The Cornish retreat had tested us both, but it had also reaffirmed the bond that bound us, a partnership forged in the pursuit of truth, however dark its path. The end.